And then Ox took Chuck the Monster O'Connor, who was Big John Studd in his rookie year. The Bounty Hunters, Moose Cholak and Paul Christie, and then Wilbur Snyder and Dom DiNucci.
Does anybody know how dangerous Moose was?
I was about to say, of all of those people, and there were some homesteaders around. Moose was from Chicago, but the Constants in Indianapolis were some of the talent that lived there, and they had jobs, but they still wrestled part-time. Yeah. Yukon Moose Cholak was the most picturesque. And Bobby says that he could hurt you just by breathing on you.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And he was in a six-man tag in St. Louis, and by the time they'd made the announcements and were about to ring the bell, Moose had hurt or crippled the other 5 guys and the referee, I think. But he'd run amok and was throwing people without watching where he's going, and boom, boom, boom. And he was a big man. He's a powerful man.
He was like, what, 6'4" and 350, and huge, and in the early days,
when he said boo-boo, you better watch out.
He brought that Moosehead, right? A giant. He was from Moosehead, Maine. Not sure if that's a legitimate location. I believe it's near Bangor. I'm not sure. But a giant, legitimate stuffed moose head with horns that he would strap this apparatus on his head. And he'd been in Chicago. He'd been over since, the days of Billy Gells and the Marigold Arena and all that stuff.
Yeah.
They knew he was. He drove a bus, I think, didn't he, in Chicago for a while?
I don't know. His family had a bar, and his father had passed away, and the mother had it. And when I was there, he was helping his mom run the bar.
But the Big Splash was his finish?
Became a big hangout for the Notre Dame fans of the Notre Dame football team. They would gather at Moose's Bar in Chicago.
At Moose's Bar. Come to Moose's Bar.
Yeah.
Miniker used to love to bring him out, I remember, for the, because they also had the classic interviews on TV, the commercials, where Leon's Tailoring, where Sam would come out in a nice suit, and then Moose would come out in it looked like Omar the tent maker had made the suit jacket. They see, Leon's Tailoring can fit anybody.
One night we were all in the dressing room, and I think we were wrestling in Buck Lake, Indiana, which is this well, I should say that. It was a small...
We don't have a lot of fans in Buck Lake.
Yeah.
You can go ahead and be candid here.
Yeah, it was a small area, and it drew these people, but it was a very small venue. It was a resort kind of a place, but the resort was around this little mud hole type fishing pond. Anyway, and we would wrestle, and there were no showers or anything. We'd have to jump in the mud hole to get clean. And anyway, but Moose comes from Chicago. He gets out of the car, and he's got on a nice, beautiful, pure white shirt and pure white shorts, knee-high shorts, and white tennis shoes. And he looks, for Moose Cholak, he looks pretty sharp.
Grading on the curve, he was doing good, right?
So the next night we're working someplace else in Indiana, and he arrives and he's got the same shirt on, same pants. Spot of this, a spot of that, spot of I'm sure he took it home and boiled it for soup because it had food all over it. It had this, that, and the other. But he was a moose. He was a moose. Yeah.
So Moose was not one of your favorite guys to work with. You said everybody was good, but probably not real easy.
Yeah, he was. Moose was generally a challenge, but I got along well with him, and I sure would probably feel a lot better, and my body would look a lot better if I hadn't wrestled him every other night. But he did the best he could, and he was, you drew money with the guy who.
So after 75, Bruiser would bring in his opponent, and they were generally big names that were working other territories, but he'd bring them into Indy, maybe Chicago, St. Louis. He worked programs with Ivan Koloff, again with Ernie, came back later on in the 70s. Bruiser Brody came in for a while. That didn't end well. Brody was upset over a payoff. Bruiser was not really wanting to give him any more. Bruiser stormed across the building into the heel locker room to ask Brody what his problem was, and they ended up in a little dust-up. And Brody had 20 years on him, and a lot of size, so Dick basically got jammed in the locker and busted open a little bit, and ended up saying, okay, and the next time he saw Brody, here's your money. We good? We good. Okay. And you got to think, geez, if Dick was what, he'd been past 50.
Yeah.
If he's going to get up and Bruiser Brody's face when he was past 50, well, we know what he was like in his younger days.
Oh, he was a pistol, yeah.
Did you ever see that? Was he calmed down by the time you worked for him, or was he still the guy that liked to go out and start a riot just for the fun of it?
Are you talking about in the ring?
Well, actually, even outside the ring, he was known for both.
Yeah, he in the. He knew how to get the fans up, but he knew how to settle them down too. So I don't think he was really out to cause any riots in the ring. And what he did outside, I heard a lot of stories about him in his younger days when he was playing football and things like that. He had problems with coaches and stuff, and there was fisticuffs and.
Alex Karras will tell. So.
Well, that was a boat angle they were shooting, and that was Detroit, and they wrecked a bar and lawsuits, and it was a whole big.
Yeah, I believe federal court, as a matter of fact. I believe.
Did it make it? Oh, okay.
But anyway, Bruiser brought guys like that in. Brody, even Harley. In the early '80s, Harley was his champion. Would make a shot or two a month, but the rest of the roster began to be the semi-retired homesteaders. We talked about Moose, Jerry Valiant, Guy Mitchell, Mass Strangler, the Stomper. How many names did he have? He wasn't the Mongolian Stomper, but Guy Stomper Mitchell. He started there as one of the assassins in the mid-'60s with Joe Tommaso and ended up being one of the last champions. He was from the area. And, I think probably as the Mass Strangler, that was Indianapolis's last hurrah. They brought Guy in, put the mask on him, was the Mass Strangler. Johnny Starr, I think, was his manager. And they built him up, put the belt on him. He beat Bobo. He beat everybody. And finally, the big blow-off. No TV on this match, ladies and gentlemen. Mask versus title, leave town, money up stipulation. They did 10,000 people in Indianapolis when it had been years. Yeah. But that may have been the last hurrah. Sheik and Bruiser had a little revamp in '77, got the crowds up. I was at that Market Square Arena event. They did 9,000 people. But at that point, did he ever ask you? You had had such success there. Did he ever ask you to come back in and do another program, or you didn't have time, or he never made the call?
Oh, I did work for him. I guess it was back then, but it was just like 3 shots. I don't even remember what the towns were, but I didn't do a TV or anything for him or a promo. So I knew the territory was hurting at the time. But he brought me in for 3 or 4 shots.
What was? Cause you spent a lot of time in the
treated
late
me
70s.
better then than when I worked for him.
Oh yeah, when you're there, they'll wipe their feet on you, and then you come back in as a. The best payoff I ever got from Dallas was my last night in. I was already in Georgia by the time I left. They could have given me anything, and if I'd have got this before, we'd have stayed.
Yeah.
But you spent a lot of time working for Vern in the late '70s. What were you hearing when you go to Chicago? What were you hearing about Indiana at that point? Was there any scuttlebutt like, geez, it's starting to look sad down? Because Vern's business was
booming,
getting better. It was booming at that point. Had a lot of great talent.
Yeah, Vern always had great talent. I don't remember hearing any of the stories. I knew that I didn't know very many of the guys.
When you see a bunch of names on a card somewhere that you've never been in a locker room with and you don't recognize, you know that maybe the budget is down. Yeah.
I remember there's a kid that I used to work out with, Wojciechowski.
The great Wojo, hot shot amateur, right?
He became the great Wojo, but when he was in high school, some of the teams I made, they'd have camps around Ohio or Michigan, and he would come up and be like cannon fodder. He would work out with us, because he's interested in wrestling. He wanted to learn from quote the best and this, that, and that. So he was a workout partner of mine for many, many years, and I remember going to Chicago or one of those places, and I heard him talking about him as the great Wojo. I thought, wow.
He was one of Bruiser's last champions in like the early '80s. Here's a question. Did you ever just get frustrated with anybody and just think, hell with the Baron gimmick, I'm just going to take this guy down and stretch him? Because Kenny Boland, my best friend, and we used to watch, even before we knew each other, we were staying up till 2 o'clock in the morning to get Channel 4 out of Bloomington to watch Dick the Bruiser's TV show, right? And all the matches that we've talked about, and we just sat there and transfixed, even on reruns. But when later on, and years later, when I told him that you were a great amateur wrestler and a great collegiate, etc., he said, no. There was no semblance in your style. You completely changed gimmicks, characters, personas, whatever. You became the Baron. There was no amateur wrestling involved because a German Baron wouldn't do that. But did you ever, every once in a while, just for fun, take somebody down and just, hey, we're going to play a minute?
A couple of times for self-defense, I would do it just to let them know that.
Who tried anything with you?
Oh, there were a couple guys that got cute.
Come on. They're never going to see this. We won't tell them. We're just among friends here.
Good friend of mine, Jerry Blackwell.
Really?
Yeah, great worker, but no amateur background, whatever, but also a great athlete. He could.
For that size,
he
the
could
things
dunk
he
a
could
basketball. Do you know that?
I didn't know that.
Yeah, at one time. But anyway.
And just anybody who hasn't seen Jerry Blackwell, he was what, 5'10" and 400 pounds, right? So
he was, but he was very athletic. But anyway, he did something. He says, "Get out of this," like he was, I don't know. So I got out of it and I held him down. He never bothered with that again. And I had a little deal with Billy Robinson. I did the same thing. He was.
Okay, now tell me more, because Robinson has such a great reputation and a great, all the stories.
Yeah, he knew a lot about wrestling and stuff, but he's what they called a shooter, and most of the guys that get that reputation, they say, "Let me get this hold on you," or they say. Yeah. Get me in this hold, and they know exactly how to hurt you from that hold. Or they get the hold on you, and then they don't let go until it's too late. And so anyway, I was working. We were in a program too, and we're getting along real well in the ring, I thought. And just to be cute, he stuck his elbow in my ribs and was grinding it. And he says, "How do you like that?" So I showed him. I got up and out and made him look like silly, He never bothered me again. So.
Well, now, and you mentioned the shooter. It's like, hey, kid, let me show you something, or like the old Stu Hart thing. Hey, let me put this hold on you, or whatever. But a great amateur collegiate wrestler can out wrestle a shooter. But the shooter's main weapon is that they use all the holes that are not allowed in amateur collegiate wrestling. They're break your bones. So you've got to be on the same page.
Yeah, they go against the joints and things like that. Yeah. And you're not supposed to do that in amateur wrestling, but doesn't mean you can't. I mean, you got to know how to. You don't learn to do some of those things because you're interested. That's all.
You got to know how to get away with it too.
Yeah.
What was Robinson like to work with?
He could be a very excellent worker, unless he got into one of his silly moods, which he often did. But I got along well with him in the ring, except that one time. And after that, it was always good. And so,
I guess with Indianapolis, we come to the early '80s. Bruiser made a partnership with Jerry Jarrett to provide talent because he'd really lost all but the guys that lived there, right? And they weren't running a lot of towns. He wasn't booking a lot of towns. Snyder retired in '83, moved to Florida. 54 years old. He'd saved all his money, invested in real estate. He goes to Florida. Bruiser tried a little while longer, but he was in 1984, Bruiser was champion for the 10th time, and the tag team champions were Bruiser and Jeff Van Camp, who was a kid from Louisville that worked his first few matches the previous year and was huge, and I think was the first Lord Humongous and never did anything past that. So you could kind of see the writing on the wall. But they pretty much.
I guess little Jimmy Raschke didn't do so bad then.
You know,
sorry, Jeff.
That was the that was the thing is that Indianapolis had been huge in the 50s, the transition in the 60s, and then that early period of the 70s. It was magic. And business all over the Midwest was huge because we talked about the Victory Field ballpark show in Indy. That was just 6 weeks before Comiskey Park in Chicago. The double main event was Mad Dog and Butcher Vachon and Bruiser and Crusher off that angle where Crusher kicked Mad Dog in the hand or in the head while he was getting his juice on TV. And
I almost bled to death.
he hit a arm.
I had to go to the hospital.
That is on YouTube, by the way. It's insane. There's blood spurting. There's blood on the curtains. There's blood on the cameras. People are running and screaming like nuclear fire showers are coming. And that match and you and Vern for the AWA title drew 30,000 fans. August 14th, 1970. Was that the biggest crowd of your main event career? It had one of the biggest crowds in the States at the time.
At the time it was. I really don't know because, I worked at the Madison Square Garden. I don't know how many that held in different places, so I don't know. But it was very big, and I should have gotten suspicious because Vern, the office bought fireworks display for the scoreboard to go off in case Vern won the championship.
Oh, you don't think they were going to spend that money on those fireworks and not blow them off, do you?
Oh, 10 grand or whatever it would cost.
Talk about why did Vern never work Indianapolis? If he was partners with Bruiser in Chicago, he never came to Indy that I remember.
Well,
too far for him to travel? Not motivated?
Well, a quote that Dick told me one time, they're thinking of bringing in, Wilbur said, Wilbur is trying to get Nick Bockwinkel booked in Indy, and Bruiser says, that's all we need, another 40-year-old babyface. So Vern being older than 40, I don't know. Maybe that didn't work out for him. I don't know. They're making up stuff.
Well, Dick had that voice, by the way. You and Mad Dog, you do the voice. Dick had the voice. It was a football deal, right? And
Mad Dog had he had a crushed trachea.
Oh, did
At
he?
one time, yeah. Somebody punched him in the throat.
Not when he was in like one of the street fights or bouncing in the bars or beating up all of Montreal.
Yeah.
But Bruiser got whacked in the throat playing football for the Packers in the early 50s, and that was pretty much that was his voice. He could put a little more behind it for TV, but he talked like that anyway, right?
Yeah, right. He had a gruff voice, and so did Dog. He always.
Yeah, it just the whole package. Yeah, it just seemed like it fit.
That's back in the days when the clothesline was legal in the football. So
that's right. Yeah.
He probably did get it that way.
What was Crusher like? I met Crusher several times and got a chance to talk to him just briefly and just, hello sir, how are you?
Yeah.
Please sign my autograph. And I was 45 at the time, so no. But Crusher seems like the opposite of Bruiser in that he always he got along with everybody. He was kind of happy-go-lucky about the whole thing, but he'd always get in the fight with Vern every spring.
Yeah.
And that way he'd get the summer off, and then they'd make up in the fall.
Yeah,
So
Wally would get him back. Crush and I had fierce battles throughout my career, coming up as I was coming up, and we drew a lot of money against each other, and then towards the end of my career, we became partners.
Yeah.
And we won the AWA championship belt, I guess.
And the classic case of those over 40 baby faces still being able to draw.
Yeah. Was it over Nick and? But anyway, we got to be real close. We traveled together for, a couple of years, almost every day, and he was more of a quiet guy, and a lot of people don't know this because all of his interviews were about, when I was a kid, I was drinking a beer, carrying the keg up the hill to my dad's tavern, spilling more than I drank. And He didn't drink beer. He drank. He
No.
always drank wine. Yeah.
Oh, now my whole childhood was wasted, and I can't recover from the Crusher doesn't drink beer.
He did drink wine though. He and Bruiser both like wine.
When he would come out and talk about the Dolly sisters, Henning and Race, and, and he was going to train him, Bruiser were going to train with the beer barrel and the polka and the fat women in Milwaukee and all that stuff. He's sipping wine with his pinky out.
Yeah, that's him.
He started out as like a bleach blonde, pretty boy guy in the 50s, him and Stan Lasowski, the Lasowski brothers. And then, did he ever tell you how that they came upon the idea, or was it just a happenstance that he and Bruiser looked so much together and he got the crew cut and became the Crusher?
I have no idea how they got together, but really worked for them, and they were sensational. They made.
And I guess Crusher was Vern's top draw over the years, right? As on the babyface side.
Yeah, for the longest time, yeah.
Because in Milwaukee, 69 to 74, every time Crusher was on the card, they'd sell out. It was special when he would come to Indianapolis. It would always be, when Bruiser would go work for Vern, it was Crusher bringing Bruiser in so that stuff doesn't happen again, right?
I don't want to spoil anything for you, but they aren't really cousins.
Does that mean that Hulk Hogan and Brutus Beefcake aren't brothers? No.
Them I don't know about.
Bruiser would go to work for Vern at Crusher's behest, but in Indianapolis it was Bruiser saying, "I'm going to bring the Crusher in," and I got to see them in person. Like '76, I think, was their last run there with the belt. I got to go up and see them a couple of times, and the people, time stood still. The people didn't recognize. Here's these guys that are 50 years old. It was like these are the toughest guys in the world. They had that aura, and they had done for so many years. They proved it.
They could work.
And they could work.
They made you believe.
Except they're working, and now I don't know how it would stand up if you weren't conditioned to these are the two toughest guys on the face of the planet for the past 15 years like people were then. I don't know how it would stand up for fans today, but their working was basically not working. It was just be in a fight and sell very little, sort of because Bruiser sold nothing in real life, so why should he sell in the ring, right? I guess.
Exactly.
But it was for the time. It was magic, and those two guys, and like I said, they're out there, and the fans are like, "Yes, Bruiser and Crusher here to save the day." Was it true that when they finally got in the ring with the Road Warriors for Vern and I guess Animal or Hawk, they had no idea. Bruiser, Crusher, they don't know what's going on. They started picking them up and slamming them, and people all of a sudden went. And 30 years of preconditioning went away because now they were old.
Yeah, well, when I like Bruiser and Crusher, and I like Animal and Hawk, but when Animal and Hawk and Paul Ellering as their manager, they got over sensational, and they got over because they just went out and pounded everybody into the ground, and they had not a good conception about what this business was all about. And part of it is a little bit of give and take. And they were takers, not givers. So I'm talking about this early on. And that's when they wrestled.
This was their first couple of years in the business. They were green as pepper trees.
Yeah, and that's when they had this conflict with Bruiser and Crusher, I'm sure. And it was so that they went over.
Thankfully, by the time they figured it out,
they learned. Yeah. Oh, we should do some of that.
Well, a couple of years later, they were selling for the Midnight Express because at first we were like, "Oh God, these are the guys that beat up Bruiser and Crusher," and now Bobby and Dennis and Stan are like, "Oh, But they picked it up.
Yeah.
But
they could
it sounds familiar. Two guys, big, mean, rough, tough, great bodies that just beat people up and sell nothing and give nothing. Imagine that.
But then,
Bruiser and Crusher, 30 years later, the Road Warriors, there's a lot in common there.
Yeah,
but you had to know, like you said, the time. Yeah. Bruiser was a mean motor scooter in his day. I've seen the tapes from the films from Chicago, and he's taking hip tosses, and he's taking bumps, and he's jumping over the top rope in the 50s. Yeah. You know, to play pro football and be an athlete at that level, he was Brock Lesnar. Yeah. Brock Lesnar, when the first day I saw Brock Lesnar when he walked into OVW, I said, "My God, it's Dick the Bruiser, down to the crew cut." Of course, you know, he ended up, he's never going to own the promotion, and he's probably not going to, last 30 years, but physically they were so similar, and they had a lot in common.
Yeah, they do. They did.
Who else during your time in the Midwest would you consider? Who's the best wrestler you ever saw? If you're sitting there looking as I'm just a wrestling fan, I'm going to watch the match. Who did you enjoy watching? Who was the best you saw? Without hurting anybody's feelings.
Yeah, I can't. There were so many great ones, and I got to work with all those people. I got to work with Bruno. I got to work with Bobo. I got to work with all the great ones. And you know, my first match with Luthez, we went an hour. I mean,
God.
And that was when I was working with Sheik. I was still raw in the business. That was my first year, and so you know, if he can do that with me back then, he had to be great.
Yeah.
And then, like I said, I worked with Dick the Bruiser, several hour draws because, you know, he wanted me back the next year, I guess.
Vern would stick himself in, and Vern usually wore his belt. Bruiser was not that bad with it. He didn't put the belt on him. He started out with the belts, and they would go back to him, but he would put them on other people. And Snyder was more giving. He was always tag champion with everybody. He was never the singles champion, well, maybe once, but he had the tag team title with a variety of people, but he would switch them back around. Bruiser didn't do a lot of jobs, but if it was his business on the line, he would make arrangements.
He was a good businessman. He definitely knew what he was doing, and he knew how to mix that pot so it kept bubbling and kept bubbling.
I think